Cool. Right, let's do this podcast. Let's record another episode of the CineSkinny podcast.
Wait. Must be trying to get the energy.
Legitimate jump scare. Right?
Get that football crowd energy.
Da 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 da. CineSkinny. What? Hello and welcome back to the CineSkinny. It's the film podcast from the film podcast and football hooligan farm from the team behind the Skinny magazine. Anahit has gone to Venice, hence the unruly nature of this introduction. It's me, Jamie, and Ellie here at ground floor, the new EHFM gaff. Say hello, both.
Hello. Hi.
Good stuff. Solid start. Things are looking up. So yeah, Anahit's gone to Venice, but she'll be along shortly to tell us what she's been seeing in a pre-recorded voice note that none of us have heard yet, due to the magic of time and editing. So who knows what she'll say? Shocking? Interesting?
Well, she's probably watching Queer right now, which is the new Luca Guadagnino film, which I believe is all people are talking about on Twitter.
Excellent.
Or X, or what it's called.
Well, so hopefully this is like that weird foreshadowing thing. We have to be like, well, hopefully that will have been interesting and will continue to be interesting. Speaking of having to do that, we have to do the thank yous for the CineSkinny Film Club screenings that did at time of recording that were still down as happening. They were on Tuesday and Wednesday, but as we currently speak, neither of them have happened yet.
And potentially Summerhall doesn't have the file, but that's another story.
That's either going to be a really fun bit of inside baseball goss for the listeners, or it's just going to be a stark admission of the fact that one of the screenings did not happen. Place your bets now.
I mean, the thing is, this film is streaming on Mubi, so at the worst, I could just put it on my laptop and we could all watch, just sit around it.
That is a very good point. So
film night at Jamie's. Everyone come around his gaff.
Yeah, so thanks for coming to the CineSkinny Film Club screenings at Summer Hall and CCA that we did with Mubi of La Chimera. I'm sorry if anyone couldn't see Jamie's laptop from the back row. But yeah, thanks to everyone who came, and we will have more of those to announce in the fullness of time. Now, because there's only the three of us, and because we are running a bit late, we are going to hand over the segment where we talk about what we've been watching recently to our colleague who's gone to Italy to a film festival. So this is Anahit Baruz's take on what she's been watching at the Venice Film Festival.
Hello from the Lido, where it is a healthy 30 degrees outside. I think we all need to really rethink our commitment to living in Scotland. I think we also need to rethink our commitment to cinema, because the films this year have kind of not been it. I think I've seen 11 so far. I have one left, which is Alex Ross Perry's Pavements, which apparently fucks. But out of everything else, I think I've actively liked 3, which is kind of damning if you think about it. But maybe it's me. I'm not actually willing to accept the problem is me. Some of the films have genuinely just been like so fucking mid. But I'm going to tell you very quickly about the 3 that I liked. My favourite is Babygirl, which is by the director who did Bodies, I think last year, a year and a half ago. And it is super fun and sexy and interesting. Reminds me and vibes a lot of May, December. I think some people are like kind of describing it as an erotic film, but it is sexy and it is about eroticism, but really it's about power and sex and desire in the same way that May, December was. And I love the way that May, December kind of did that. So this one has Nicole Kidman, Harris Dickinson, and she is like girl boss CEO. He is the new intern, and they start this illicit relationship. But it's really clever in the various ways that it thinks about like layers of power. So obviously she's his boss, but then there's also this layer of like gender to it. And then the most interesting layer is that she's just like a sub and just kind of wants to be dominated. And she's married to Antonio Banderas and he's not really doing it for her. And so it's kind of exploring power in relationships and how that intersects with your desire and with kind of who you are as a person, your self-identity, and the extent to which like you're exploiting other people or not. And it's just like really clever and really like I felt so surprised by it. The other film that is really good is Brady Corbett's The Brutalist, which is 3.5 hours long, which maybe should be illegal, but it went by really quickly. And it kind of reads as a biopic about this Hungarian-born brutalist architect who's like meant to be like the grandfather of brutalism. He's played by Adrian Brody, and it's like this sweeping epic that kind of goes from just after World War II through to the 60s, 70s. And it's kind of looking at his life and like the legacies of like violence that he's inherited, and he starts working for this patron. It's really incredible. And then I came out of the film and I googled it, and this man does not exist. So it's also doing something really interesting with that like genre of like historical fiction or like biopics or whatever. But yeah, some really, really interesting ideas on nationhood and belonging, and yeah, the ways that we kind of like inherit trauma and violence, and ways that we try and make ourselves like safe, and that's really interesting. And then the other one that I really, really liked was Luca Guadagnino's Queer, which is based on William S. Burroughs' novel of the same name. Has Daniel Craig. He's like an expat living in Mexico City in the 1950s, and he gets a big old crush on this much younger man. And it's a lot about, yeah, like the obliteration of desire and all of the things that Luca Guadagnino does really well. I think it's not my favorite of his that he's done in like the last few films, but I think it might also be one that grows on you a little bit. So yeah, that's my update. I realized most of the update was me complaining. I hope that's okay. But yeah, it's been a bit of a strange year. There were some things that I thought would be really good, like Pablo Larraín's Maria. What else? Pedro Almodovar's first like English language feature. And there were a lot of them that were just kind of like fine, but not like great. So yeah, it's been a bit of a sort of low-key time. But I'm excited for you guys to see those three, especially because they're really interesting and really good. I hope I didn't send this too late. Hope you're all doing well. I'll see you in rainy Scotland in a few days. Okay, bye.
Wasn't that great? What a
Great.
What a good selection of films, or one film that she talked about. It's so good that it was great, / such a shame that it wasn't any good.
Can't wait to see that Arnold Schwarzenegger film. It sounds really good.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that there was so many. You know what, actually? I was going to say I couldn't believe something, but I genuinely couldn't believe that the new Robbie Williams biopic, he's a chimp.
Okay, I've seen people making jokes about this. Is this real?
I thought this was a punk. I thought I was being, I think you should leave. But it turns out actually true. He is portrayed in the Robbie Williams biopic. Robbie Williams is portrayed by a Planet of the Apes style monkey.
I believe it might be Robbie Williams playing the monkey. I may have misread that, but I think that's true.
I would be willing to believe that like there's a scene in the Robbie Williams biopic, or that it's some sort of like being John Malkovich thing where it's really not. I don't know. Like, is it a legit, straight up biopic about Robert Williams of Take That? But he's a monkey.
Ellie, there can be miracles when you believe.
It's true, the magic of filmmaking.
I know.
I mean, it's made me instantly want to watch the film.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually quite smart.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's absolutely no way I would be watching a Robbie Williams biopic if you didn't tell me that it was basically that scene from the Jordan Peele film, but it just carries on in that wise for the whole rest of the thing.
Yeah, the question is, does he throw poo at Gary Barlow?
Are all the rest of Take That played by monkeys? There's just so many
Is
questions.
it by different animals? Is it a Madagascar situation? I don't know why that's the first film I can think of in which there's anthropomorphic
The
animals.
only film that has more than one animal in it, Madagascar.
2 weeks ago we talked about Robin Hood, a marginally more superior film about talking
Let's not
animals.
talk shit about Madagascar. But also, let's not talk more about Madagascar because we're detracting from the real story here, which is that the Robbie Williams biopic, of which Anahit did not discuss at all, guaranteed 10 out of 10. It's going to be really fun if she actually did talk about it. But
I would put money that Anahit has not seen this film. I could see this is the thing that Anahit would see on the lineup and say, there's all these amazing films. I could see the Almodovar film. I could see the Luca Guadagnino film. I don't think she's going to go to Robbie Williams film.
you know what? The CineSkinny podcast will review the Robbie Williams monkey film. That is a promise.
Yeah.
That is a promise and a threat. Let's move on to a film we've actually watched, which does have an animal in it. So, a neat tonal segue. So, Starve Acre, a film that in the office everyone kept mishearing as Starve Acre. So, Starve Acre is the new film from Daniel Cockatello, who made Apostasy a few years back. So it's about a young couple in rural Yorkshire who are haunted by the death of their young son, probably an inappropriate badumtish there, when while Juliet is kind of grieving the lost Richard, who is the husband, he's an archaeologist, kind of throws himself into his work and soon finds something spoopy in the back garden that is linked to some pagan rituals from times gone by. Days of yore. Matt Smith, formerly Doctor Who, is Richard. Morfydd Clark, who played the title character in St. Maud, was also in His Dark Materials and is Galadriel in the new Lord of the Rings thing. She plays Juliet. And you can file this one under two of the CineSkinny's favourite film categories, which is folk horror and puppets, brackets, weird undead. Ellie, as our noted connoisseur of weird puppets in these kind of films, what did you think of Starve Acre?
First of all, to address the puppet's good. Yeah. Enjoyed the puppet, thoroughly enjoyed the puppet, can't get enough puppets. And that sort of speaks to, I think, like a wider thing about the film, which is that its design is great. It looks fantastic. It feels fantastic. Ooh, the 70s is creepy, isn't it? Ooh, the 70s is so creepy. All that wood paneling and children wearing corduroy flares. That's so creepy. Matt Smith and his creepy long hair that he's always moving out of his face. Oh, the 70s is so creepy. And it's doing it really, really well. It knows what it's doing. It's touching on these like very sensory, textural ideas about the 1970s, especially out in Yorkshire. We've got this great color palette. Everything's very sepia, very tan. Everything, like, it all looks sort of like cold. We see these sweeping shots of like the moors and like gorse or furs that grow on them. And we keep getting these shots of like roots underneath the ground that are like huge and slick with sap or maybe blood that just sort of like, you know, disrupt the whatever's happening in the domestic lives of the characters. And like I said with the puppet, like we do these like close-ups of this puppet's eye. Like it is just sort of a great little like aesthetic practice in folk horror. As for like the plot beats and what you're actually going to be seeing in this film, it's not anything wholly original, right? Like it's not really a spoiler to say, but we've got this couple and they're grieving, but there is a sort of malevolent spiritual force on the moors with whom they can make a pact, but it's actually very sinister. Things come back, but they come back wrong. These sorts of like very stereotypical folk horror plot beats. There's even a point where Matt Smith, you know, he's found these bones that are growing this strange organic matter. So he takes them in a box to the university, only for his colleagues to look at them and just see normal bones. But when he takes them home, the organic matter is multiplied, you know, and it's that sort of like, we're really familiar with like scenes and sort of sequences like that by this point. That sort of, it's playing by that logic, really, where like, we're not given any reason why this stuff doesn't appear at convenient times. It just doesn't, because that's what's convenient for the plot, right? It makes the characters more isolated, because realistically, people in a horror film would not let themselves be that isolated. So it has to sort of like nip it in the bud. I think that's probably what is maybe what's quite unsatisfying about this film, is that we never really get it laid out, like what is happening, what the rules are. There's such like strong montage of Matt Smith in this like, you know, sort of dreary 1970s study with these like, you know, filing boxes everywhere, typewriters up on the shelves. This is like going through folders and stuff like that, finding all these like strange scripts and graphs that his father left behind about, this like, you know, these strange pagan rituals that used to be practiced out here in the Dales or whatever. But we never actually get any definition of the rituals themselves, what they supposedly do or what you have to give up. Like, we do vaguely. We know it's a folk horror film and we pretty much know how the characters are compromised. It's just that, like, unfortunately, they're not laying out the real rules of how this works. So it can feel pretty unsatisfying when stuff just happens for the sake of happening. Like, I'm not entirely mad about that, you know? Like I say, I was just so pleased by the filmmaking. Right up until the end of the film, I just kept finding shots where I'm like, oh, that's a great shot. Oh, that's been framed in such an interesting way. The way that we see not just the exterior, but the interior of this house, we see it from strange angles. There's one shot that I really love. We're like in a corridor looking down two separate doorways at two different characters side by side, but obviously divided by a wall. Just that, like having a really good time kind of just showing things or not showing things, especially when we get to like that creepy mechanical hair. But I do think that like what for me was pretty inexcusable is that there's no like decent meaty scares about this. That strong camera work gives you the sense that something horrible is going to happen, but you're never really like horrified. You know, there's this point where where Morfydd Clark is just staring at the wall, and there's this sort of like creepy sound going on, and then we cut back to the wall from her face, and now there's a ghost there with its hand up. And it's like, well, it literally just appeared in the off-cut. Like, it's not like it moved into the film in any interesting way. It reminds me of another folk horror director who I really like, which is Ari Aster. And in that opening scene in Hereditary, where she comes back into her studio after her mother's funeral and looks into the dark and just sort of sees something. So you see the expression of her horror on Toni Collette's face in the same way that you do with Morfydd Clark. But like, when we actually see the darkness, you're straining, you're leaning in, you're interacting with the film. Whereas this is just showing you of its great slideshow of 70s folk horror, Pinterest board stuff. Like, it's just, we're cutting back to slightly more disturbing images. You know, it never really like moves into the film. It never really sort of moves in a dynamic way. And unfortunately, like, you know, it all builds to a head and it takes a while to build. And once it's finally at that climax where this sort of finally horrific stuff is happening, it happens off screen. Like, the first really grisly thing that actually occurs in the plot. We're busy with the sister trying to make a phone call at a public payphone, and when we cut back, it's done. So it's like, you know, you're so tantalizingly close to having something really visceral because it's got this sort of great sense of unease that it delivers with its design, with its filmmaking. But it's just that there's maybe like not clear enough an idea of what is happening, and a kind of reluctance to just show something as it's meant to be seen, or in an interesting way. So a bit of a letdown for me. Like, I think that's the thing, is if you have an interest in folk horror, this would be worth checking out for the embellishments everywhere that kind of produce this aesthetic. But I don't necessarily know that like I felt scared or anything, or even particularly like thrilled.
Jamie, does this prove once and for all that self-publishing is a mistake?
Yes.
The father's book, the father's weird, creepy book. Let's do another take of that.
You confused me there.
No, Jamie, what did you think of this film? Did you think it was any good?
I completely agree. Yeah, it was just so disappointing, because you're right, it does look amazing. It's like, shout out to Adam Scarth, who's the cinematographer. Every shot is incredible, takes your breath away. You know, the Yorkshire moors in the 70s are creepy. The set design is creepy. Like, there's detail in every scene, and then there's nothing around it. It's like such a weird... I actually don't know how a film like this gets made, because Daniel Cochlea is a very good filmmaker. His first film, Apostrophe, was really good. It was like a very personal film based on like him growing up Jehovah's Witness, and it's about a young girl. It's kind of madness of religion. It's actually much more like a horror film, even though it's not actually a horror film. It's like much more creepy. It's a girl who believes she's communing directly with God. Really unsettling. And then it's weird. It's as if the filmmaker like loves this genre. It's like he knows the genre inside it, because he knows all the cliches of it. He's puts every single cliche you can think of from these movies into the film, yet somehow he can't actually do the horror part. Like, he doesn't quite know how it all ties together. So it's as if somebody has seen how to do it, but then doesn't actually understand what makes it scary. And actually, a lot of these folk horrors from the 70s, part of what made them scary was their contemporary. You know, they weren't always, there's obviously period folk horror, but actually a lot of the great ones we think of, sort of The Wicker Man or Don't Look Now, which is referenced here, they're contemporary films. So I don't know why he felt he had to see it in the past, because it sort of doesn't really make any sense that it's set in the 70s, to be honest. Other than it's got this aesthetic that he finds creepy. It's just full of like really bad scenes. Like there's so many moments where Matt Smith will just wander into, like, he's going through these papers and he would just read aloud, "Oh, my dad did this to me when I was 5. Like, who does that? It's just like, it's moving plot along. You can see the machinations, happening. Like, somebody's obviously went in and said, "By the way, Daniel, this film isn't really moving very fast and nobody knows what's going on. Can you have a moment where Matt Smith explains what's going on?" It's just really bad film. Really disappointing. And even the last 20 minutes where it all goes haywire and it's a complete clusterfuck, it doesn't quite make sense. Like, the character motivations, you don't quite even know why people are doing what they're doing. It's not very satisfying, even like the sort of way it ends. It can, it's inevitable how it's going to end, but it's not satisfying in that way. So real disappointment, I think I would say.
The script is quite poor. The performances are alright. Like,
but the performances are essentially just people moping around. It's Matt Smith walking from room to room, like upset. Like, you know, like I feel bad for the actors because actually they're great actors, but they've nothing to work with at all.
Yeah, it's a very weird one. It's like you can see, it's one of those ones you can see how it got made, and you can also kind of see how it went, like where it went wrong. Like, because I think that the idea is all right. Like the central premise is pretty decent. If you were to actually make it into a horror film, it's like very, very big letters folk, and then very, very small letters horror. Just, and like you say, just not very much actually happens.
Yeah.
Like it takes a very, very, very long time to really get anywhere. And then there's also like weird inconsistencies, as much as like the visual, you know, the visual aesthetic is very kind of clear in that everybody is dressed in some form of like beige or corduroy. But actually there's like, sometimes doesn't quite hit the thing on the head of having, like, why does the next door neighbor, who's like an uncle, I believe, this fella with a white beard, right? He talks like he has fallen out of Wuthering Heights. It's like, I said this today. It's like, what are you talking about? This is the 1970s, ostensibly. And then that just kind of takes you out of it a bit more, because like this guy is talking like he's like been hit in the head with an entire Hovis advert. This person is trying to kind of play it slightly more modern. This person is wandering around with, I'm sorry, the most horrific thing in this film is this fucking dog that the sister is wandering around with. She turns up day one with this, I believe, did you ID'd this as a Pekingese?
I think so, yeah, it's a Pekingese.
This genuinely
like a mop
horrific looking beast. Like, and it makes horrible, like, grunting, I want to die noises.
It's true, they're very unwell.
You know, when you see a pug try to walk up a very slight hill, and I'm like, this thing. And then the weirdest thing about this dog is I don't know what's going on, but you never once see this dog walking. The dog is always being carried.
They're a dog breed, like pugs have been bred for aesthetic purposes and are actually very unwell, but because of the long hair and its incredibly short stature, they're not very, like, mobile at all. So I'm imagining if you're trying to film it as well, it's even more difficult. Yeah. So it's going to be on the floor.
So why is the dog in the film?
Exactly.
That's my question. That was the thing I was getting hung up on. I was like, and I suppose maybe that's testament to the overall success of the film, that when you're trying to get me at the kind of horror denouement of your very sad story about a lost son and what it might require in order to bring back some sense of familial stability, that I'm saying, why is this horrible dog still here? Why am I looking at this beast that has been forsaken by God and all that's holy? What the fuck is happening?
I think my strongest theory as to why she's carrying around this Pekingese dog the entire time is because the Pekingese dog is off-white, pairs really well with the color scheme on, and probably more affordable than getting like a very authentic 70s handbag.
Yes, and I also suspect that the dog is only in it so that so basically, spoiler alert for a film that we've just decried as not very good, so feel free to jump to the next 30 seconds if you actually want to see this. There's a scene where the kind of reanimated hare attacks Morphy Clark's sister, who has the horrible dog, and I'm convinced that the dog is only in there so there was something for the hare to try and attack first and then attack her instead, which I would say is terrible script writing.
Yeah, I will say,
and also don't leave that open as a possibility for what it could be, because you know, sometimes when someone comes out with a crackpot theory like that one I've just said, and it's really easily debunked, no one in this room can say that that's not actually like a distinct possibility, that this fucking horrible satanic mop beast,
Chekhov's pug.
Yeah, Chekhov's pug is only in here so that someone can nobly defend. Also, why are you trying to defend this dog? Like, this thing is spawned from Satan. It can fight off anything. Sorry, I've gone off track.
I will say, I thought the actual design of the hair was pretty cool, and the fact they used this kind of puppet thing was kind of fun. But the thing is, hairs aren't particularly scary, are they? Like, I mean, I know that the rabbit in is it General what's his name from Watership Down is terrifying, but otherwise I can't really think of any scary rabbits. There's that horror called Night of the Lupins, which is ridiculous. Donnie Darko, yeah, I guess that's quite scary. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are all scary rabbits, but anyway, I just feel like a small rabbit is not also a very good sort of antagonist.
It's not the Vordelak, that's for sure.
It's not creepy enough.
Yeah,
not scary enough.
Yeah, insufficiently floppy legs. Anyway, if you do want to catch Starve Acre to see Matt Smith and Morphy Clark cutting about in some impressive knitwear, Starve Acre is out in the UK from this Friday, so go and catch it if you think it sounds good. Okay, and a second film for this week. A better film, you might say. Spoilers, but it is actually better. So, Red Rooms is the next one we're going to talk about. So, this is a Quebecois film directed by Pascal Plante, and it stars Juliette Garriépé. I believe that's how you pronounce it, but I did high school French, and my pronunciation was never my strong suit. I was decent at verbs, but getting things out, it's hard when you've got a Scottish accent. I'm going to carry on with the description of what this film is. So, the trial of alleged serial killer Ludovic Chevalier has begun in Quebec, and Kellyanne, who Juliette Garriépé plays, is a model who spends her days playing online poker and delving into the dark web, and she's basically at the front of the queue to get into this trial every single day. And as it plays out, Kellyanne becomes more and more obsessed with the case with Chevalier and with tracking down a grim video recorded in one of the red rooms of the title, Jamie Dunn. In keeping with this week's theme, you can file this one under courtroom drama brackets esoteric, non-English language. This reminded me a lot of things like Anatomy of a Fall and Saint-Omer, this kind of new genre of twists on courtroom procedurals where things are not as you would expect. We're not spending a lot of time with barristers with big wigs shouting objection. That's for Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney these days. Jamie, what did you think of Red Rooms?
Yeah, I thought this was a real surprise, actually. Really kind of weird and creepy. I don't think I've seen a film before that so expertly kind of withholds all its information but somehow also keeps you hooked. Like, usually I would get annoyed by a film that does that, but for somehow it works here. And yeah, like you say, it's this strange hybrid of all these genres. It's also like a tech thriller. There's like a whole kind of like, it's set roughly in present day, but there's a whole kind of element of like, we've gone beyond the web and we're in the web, and like people are like more, it's like people who are really plugged into the web is like a kind of, and it's talking about the internet and how it's kind of like a pervading force, insidious force in society. It opens in this kind of courtroom, and it is like, it's so slow and meticulous, and I thought, is this how the whole film's going to be? It's like, it gives you the opening statements from the attorneys in full. It's like, it feels like 20 minutes before we even meet the main character. And then when we meet her, she's such an enigma. She's this kind of, she has a kind of like, it's hard to say, her expressions, she doesn't give anything away. She's like the kind of that Mona Lisa smile thing where you have no idea what she's thinking at any one time.
Inscrutable.
She is
the word that I have been using because I read it in someone else's review.
She is inscrutable. That's a good word.
You couldn't screw her.
couldn't screw them if you tried.
But she just gets more mysterious as it goes, because we go back to her house and she lives in this kind of posh flat bit. There's nothing in it apart from like a chair, her computer, a blender to make smoothies. So she goes in, she makes a smoothie, she sits down, she's like, organizing her calendar, she's like multitasking, she's playing poker at the same time, but she's also getting dug into this court case and sort of digging into people's Bitcoin accounts and sort of she's like a hacker. It's like really, she's a really mysterious, interesting character. So I found her really fascinating. And then the film gets even stranger because she teams up with this groupie who is in love with Ludwig, who sort of is convinced he's innocent and he's been stitched up. And she's like, and it becomes like a kind of buddy movie because they're like an odd couple. So Kellyanne is like tall and statuesque, and like I say, she doesn't say much. She's very highly intelligent. She's kind of posh and snooty. And then she meets this other woman. What's her name? Clementine. And she's the complete opposite. She's short. She yabbers on. She's like a motor mouth. She doesn't seem very smart because she's like convinced she's followed down all these kind of like rabbit holes. She's dirt poor, so like basically Kellyanne ends up adopting her and sort of taking under her wing, and you get this weird sort of relationship going on. And I couldn't even tell what Kellyanne's thinking. Does she like this girl? Does she hate this girl? It's like so mysterious. And it's like a conspiracy film, I guess, but also a thriller. Yeah, and I love the way it kind of just drip fed its information all the way to pretty much the last scene, and it's like it makes you kind of rethink the whole film. But even then, I don't think it's sort of, it's a film that you can still think about and think, why did you do this? Why was she behaving in this way? I guess it's a film that's talking about, it's asking about our obsession with serial killers. Why are these films like so, made all the time? Why are we obsessed with? Why are people obsessed with true crime? Why do people listen to those podcasts when it's, it's like getting pleasure out of such disgusting, sort of true stories? Why are we so fascinated with it? And why would someone sort of spend their life sort of searching for information about it?
One of the things that this film does really well, and is kind of what puts it in the same category as Anatomy of a Fall, is people have worked out that a way to do courtroom dramas, because of the way that like court systems, particularly like European court systems, are structured, you don't actually get things a lot of the time like surprise witnesses, or like everybody knows basically what the evidence is going to be. And a lot of it is procedural in like the purest sense, where it's like we have to put all these things into the record so that they can all be discussed by the jury, and then something can be like determined one way or the other. And what this film does really well is it actually puts the audience's suspicion and questioning isn't of the validity of this person standing trial or on the evidence that's been presented. It's on why a particular person would be interested in this story and why they would want to follow it, which I think is kind of does something similar to things like Santomer, which talks a lot about like why an individual would want to, why people would say the things that they say in court, but also like why individuals sort of gravitate to certain cases. And Anatomy of a Fall does the thing of like why people say the things that they say and behave the ways that they do, which sometimes initially don't seem like the most rational. And it's partly because people just don't have like a big massive plan when they're being accused of murdering their husband. But yes, so Red Room's kind of, I thought it had something quite interesting in that, and it sort of like shifts the perspective away from the trial itself to the people who are following the trial and why they would do that.
I totally agree. Yeah, I had a great time with this film. I was really engaged pretty much 100% of the way through, which I think is the mark of a really good thriller. Or as you say, Jamie, like a courtroom drama hybrid tech thriller. And it is like part of this new sort of sweeping generation of like Anatomy of a Fall, Santomer, like courtroom films that are far less concerned with a did he or did he not do it narrative. That's not the question we're asking. And strangely, it's quite clever, I think, how immediately, despite the fact that it is supposedly up in the air, right? Like we're going to this trial because we do not know if this guy's going to be found innocent or guilty. But very quickly on, we're not asking that. We're much more interested in this stranger in the gallery or whatever. And I think that the way that they do that is with those opening statements. Really, the only halves of the only parts of the legal defense or the prosecution that we get, very quickly, both sides of this debate are like undermined by characters who sort of act as mouthpieces, right? So on the prosecution side, you have the mother of the victim who's like just completely emotionally traumatized. And it's really obviously by the like horrific thing that's happened to her daughter. But like she goes out and speaks to the press before the trial's even begun saying like, yeah, we know this is the guy that did it and we want him to die because he's a monster. He's going to rot in hell. Like it's that sort of thing where it's like, well, you're very obviously like compromised by kind of like the horror of what's going on. You're not speaking from a place of like complete sort of detachment. But on the flip side, you've got Clementine who's completely undermining the other side. Clementine is pointing out that everyone's acting as though he's guilty until proven innocent. But no one's going to listen to Clementine because she's also a bit nuts. She just decides that he must be innocent because she's detected some nascent sensitivity in him. So it very like quickly sweeps away any questions that we have about like, did he or did he not do it? Well, it doesn't matter because ultimately we're going to walk away from this feeling as though everyone's wrong. We instead follow this woman on this little like very detailed sleuthing story on the dark side of the internet, which I loved. I found it like so much more preferable to those sorts of those like mysteries and thrillers you get that are entirely set inside like the window of a Skype call or something like that. Like this instead uses some like very cool grounded filmmaking techniques to evoke the kind of horrors of the internet. Like the first, like you'd say with her apartment, which is incredibly Spartan, the first time we see it from the street below, we like look up at this like huge imposing glass skyscraper, but there's no street noises. So in fact, it's quite chilling and you get a sense of this like, oh, all these little apartments in their multitude that just go on forever seemingly, and you never know what's going on in those little cells behind those walls. Kind of reminds you of kind of the horrific stuff that goes on the internet, like in the sort of these anonymous red rooms they're called in the film. It's full of details like that I really think help make it have like a little bit of political commentary. The fact that like unlike Santomer or Anatomy of a Fall, this is a Montreal courtroom. It's very modern, it's white, it's clean.
And then I wasn't even sure, is that what they look like? It just seemed like so aesthetic. Like, yeah, it's like
I don't know, but like I found it like a really cool piece of symbolism because it's, I suppose if it's anything, it's supposed to suggest that it's sterile, right? They have expunged the contamination of bias from the outside world. A court is a bubble of justice. When, of course, that's not the point. Everyone here is like massive, like speaking to the press, speaking to each other, like just bringing their own sort of preconceptions into this trial, their own judgments into this trial. And like, yeah, as for the plot itself and like the story of this woman and how it unfolds, like I felt like that was maybe, if I was being pedantic, the one place in which the film could kind of like, I don't know, lengthen out a bit. Like when you've got all these like little details that are incredibly gratifying if you notice them, right? Like the fact that her dark web username is Lady of Shalott and her wallpaper background is also Grimshaw's Lady of Shalott. Like you're tying these little things together, but for a film about her playing online poker, it never quite feels like a poker game where everyone's got something they're hiding. There's only a couple characters and they're very upfront. There's even a scene where like the cybercrimes investigator is giving a testimony to the gallery saying like, so this is how the Tor network works. It improves your anonymity by giving you a .onion domain address, which like an onion gives you the layer. It even says like an onion, it gives you the layers of anonymity and stuff like that. But the film never quite feels like it has that many layers to it. So it seems really big and thrilling and imposing. There's not like a lot of just like crazy twists or unexpected kind of like latticing in the actual script. But the mise en scène, the filmmaking, like it's full of these tiny little details, which are really gratifying when you do notice them, and made it like a really enjoyable watch for me.
Also does a really good thing about it avoids the kind of, you know, it's like, it's essentially criticizing true crime, but it does the great thing of not sensationalizing it at all. So you've got these grisly murders, but we never see them. You know, so there's an amazing scene where it turns out Kellyanne has somehow got hold of footage from the Red Room, and we don't quite know how she's got hold of it. And again, that's another mystery initially. And you see her and Clementine watching them, and it's like, you get the shock by watching Clementine watch them. It's like you realize, oh my God, this is disgusting, because you see her reaction. And it's like, that is such a clever way to do it. It's this two shot, these two women, one who's watched this before, knows exactly what's coming up. She's talking about it as if it's like her favorite meme, you know, we'll look out for this bit. And then Clementine's like in utterly aghast at what she's seen. So yeah, that's a great way of like communicating the horror without showing it. And it's that kind of when you feel like, oh my God, it was really disturbing, but you actually didn't see any blood or anything, any gore. And it's all the better for doing that, because you couldn't be a film criticizing, you know, our morbid curiosity with true crime by also you know, delving into it yourself. You know, you have to keep your hands clean, and the filmmaker does that perfectly, I think. And
the central performance by Juliette Garipe is amazing, because you can tell that something's going on. It's not a completely flat performance. It's not as if you don't know anything about this person, but you don't know enough to suggest one thing or another. So you just have to keep watching to find out what she's up to. And that continues, like say, literally to like the final scene of the film. You can't quite put together. And even after the film, me and Ellie were talking about this on the tram down. There are so many different ways to read her actions. And crucially, it's a really good mystery in that sense, because you're not actually told directly. And this is what, she never like turns to the camera, or like you hear in voiceovers like, and that's what I did with my summer vacation. Like this person, you can't read them, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah. It also has like actually quite a dark sense of humor. There's like a weird section where the two girls go and play squash, and it's like what's going on? Why is this happening? Just because, like, I mean, I think there's something like deeply creepy about squash, and the people who play squash are insane. And I think it's maybe just giving us a little hint into Kellyanne's psyche.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like. It was such an unusual, like I was constantly being surprised by the things this film did, and that scene just came out of nowhere, delighted me, but it also just says so much about the two characters and why they're an interesting pair to put together on screen.
Yeah, I would suggest they play squash, because squash is a sport that can be played indoors and does not require many people to film or take part in.
Well, that's the thing. It's
They're
also
not playing like a five-side football match where it costs like $2,000 in extras every day to shoot it.
It's also a great example of just how you make a low-budget film and make it look cool and interesting, and find new visual ways to do things. Like all the scenes were like I say, I'm pretty sure Montreal courtrooms don't look like that. I think that stripped back aesthetic was commenting on,
it's just their squash room. They've
exactly.
just put some chairs in.
That's what it looks like. It looks so underfurnished. It looks like they've walked into a modern art gallery and they've just put a couple of chairs and put a desk for the, you know, a lectern from the.
But I'm sure it must be, right? Because again, like Anatomy of a Fall in Santa Mara and like European, those courthouses in those films must be like hundreds of years old and stuff like that. So there must be modern cities with like fairly modern
Maybe, but it seemed to me, even if there is, like, it seems like that's an aesthetic choice. It was so white. It's just like so unlived in.
Yeah.
You know, this room does not look. It was freshly painted.
The color language of the film is so interesting as well, because the first couple shots, I don't know if you remember, when she's waking up on the bench and going into the courtroom, like it's all in this like heavy blue filter.
Yeah, it's like the blue day for night kind of
exactly
shooting.
like this very sort of like otherworldly, surreal way of depicting nighttime. And the only time that we actually see red, the color described in the name, is in the reflection of their camera screen when they're watching something horrific. So like it signifies this kind of like I don't know, what's that like H.P. or Lovecraft short story where it's like the about the play where if anyone watches it they go mad, but obviously we never see the play, and it's this sort of thing where it's like the reaction of the character seeing it is like a really, really powerful moment, like you said, but it does a really good job of never actually revealing it, just suggesting it through color. So like it is just like a beautiful film, and it's like a very like just interesting. Like each scene kind of has its place in the story, even though there's really only like a handful of characters, and like I say, they are kind of usually just there as mouthpieces of some issue, but like it still manages to kind of like, I don't know, is it like an hour and a half, 2 hours long? Manages to fill that time and feel like it's really, really like doing interesting stuff in every scene.
I have been unable, in the time that Ellie gave that very, very eloquent description of why this film is good, find out the name of this short story.
Is it The King in Yellow or something like that? There's a bunch of H.P. Lovecraft short stories about not being able to look at things, so...
I mean, that's like also like The Ring, and you know that idea of like the cursed kind of object is like a kind of thing that is like went around for ages. But yeah, no, really good. Like if this film flew under your radar, I only thought to watch this because I actually wanted to see Starve Acre, and I thought, oh well, 2 horror films at a go. That sounds cool. Also, Anahit hates horror, so we don't really get a chance to talk about horror films much.
That's very true.
That's the only reason I watched it, and it's like actually, it's probably one of the best films I've seen all year.
I was thinking I was going to enjoy Starve Acre a lot more than Red Rooms, and it totally flipped the other way. Yeah. Really enjoyed.
So if this film has not like caught your attention, I would say check it out because it's really interesting and really unusual and does new things that I've never seen before. Yeah,
it's a very, very good film, and you can catch it at the GFT and the Cameo at the very least from this Friday. So Red Rooms, very, very good. Très bien, as they say. Okay, and for a bit of chat this week, following on from Starve Acre and Red Rooms, we want to talk about films about people getting obsessed with things in an unhealthy way. Now, it was originally going to be a conversation. We were torn between talking about obsession and talking about serial killers, and it felt a bit on the nose to kind of do, let's have a chat about serial killers. But what we ended up doing is pick films that work with both, which means we can put films about obsession in the episode title and we won't get like downranked on Spotify for putting the words serial killer in the headline. So things have worked out all right. So yeah, we've each got one. I think they do probably work for more for obsession than serial killers. But anyway, I'll stop saying the word serial killers in case it keeps getting picked up by the transcript software that Podbean has. Serial killers. Jamie, what's your film about? Is it about serial killers?
It is. Well, I mean, the obvious one I was thinking of initially when we only decided this today, but initially the thing that came to me was Vertigo, the Hitchcock film, which is, I think, probably one of the greatest films about obsession. Then I thought maybe I could go with Brian De Palma's film Obsession, which is a kind of quasi remake of like Vertigo with more incest. But I decided no, I'm not going to do that. And luckily, at the weekend,
Jamie's like, I thought about doing Vertigo, and I thought about doing the version of Vertigo with more incest in it, and I decided I'm going to go another way.
Luckily, just at the weekend, I watched The Vanishing. The 1988 Dutch French horror, which I actually hadn't seen. I had seen the American remake with Jeff Bridges and made in something 93, but I hadn't seen the original. So just by luck, I've watched it, and it's a perfect fit for this weekend. So this subject. So yeah, it's a really disturbing film about the disappearance of a young woman called Saskia from a service station while she was on holiday in France with her husband. And it's told from the point of view of the 2 men connected with the disappearance. So there is her husband Rex, who's obviously deeply disturbed that his wife has just disappeared, and it's the kind of way she's disappeared without a trace. You know, this was before kind of mobile phones and stuff, so he can't contact her. She just disappears. They've had an argument. So has she walked off? Has she just left him? Or has something sinister happened? So it's about him sort of like getting stuck in that rabbit hole of not knowing what happened. And it flashes to 3 years in the future, and he's still looking for her. He still comes back to this place in France. He puts up posters. He goes on local radio and local TV to discuss it, and it's become like a kind of well-known sort of story in that kind of local part of France. And then I think the most disturbing part of the film is it also flashes back to show us the life of the man who abducted her. And this is where the film becomes really unsettling. It shows us how he trained himself essentially to be a kidnapper. So it's I think what makes the film so disturbing, why people find it so affecting, is it's a horror film which doesn't really have any of the tropes of horror. It's almost all takes place during the day, very sunny, beautiful kind of alpine landscape, very kind of ordinary families. But this guy treats his hobby of kidnapping women like a hobby, like it's like fishing or DIY. And we see him, going out and buying all his equipment and sort of training for it and choosing what kind of chloroform works the quickest and how long it takes to knock someone out. And sort of like, it's the kind of preparation and the kind of like, it's two studies of obsession, really. It's the man whose wife has been kidnapped. He's obsessed with what happened. And he becomes obsessed in a way that he's not wanting retribution necessarily. He literally just wants to know what happened. It's like driving him insane. Like, is she alive? Is she dead? What happened to her? He doesn't seem to want sort of punishment. It's more about like, I just need to know. And then you have this guy his obsession is committing this crime, and he works through it in the way that MD, who was training to be good at something, would. So we see him sort of practicing conversation with women and how he might pick them up, and then we see him sort of just try it out on the street, like just do a couple of test runs, and it's like he tests how his heart beats. But it's the kind of matter-of-factness of it that makes it so disturbing. It's that kind of banality of evil. He's a very boring guy with a goatee, which is a hint that he might be psychotic. But he's just a very boring guy who quite often we see him sitting at home with his family, his 2 daughters and his wife, and they're watching TV, and we see Rex come on TV, and he doesn't bat an eyelid when this guy whose wife he's kidnapped is on TV talking about how he's trying to find her. And eventually the two guys kind of meet and sort of there's a kind of connection. And to say more would spoil the film, because I think it does have a really powerful ending and a powerful twist that it's famous for. But actually, I think the structure of the film and the way it kind of flashes between these two men and treats both the stories, shoots it exactly the same, and doesn't sort of make sort of Raymond's who's the kidnapper, his life seems sinister. It doesn't shoot what he's doing in any kind of sinister way. Like I say, it's shot during the day. There's no kind of sinister music when he's around. That's what makes it disturbing. It's like we treat both stories exactly the same, and when they connect, it's very explosive. But yeah, it's a very kind of, it's a film that's so sunny and so beautiful looking that you don't quite appreciate how dark and sinister it's going to go, and that's what kind of takes you by surprise. It's a film that you slip into the darkness in a very kind of like terrifying way. So yeah, a really good film, worth watching. Definitely do not watch the American remake, which changed the ending and made it a kind of happy ending. This film is like as bleak as it gets. But like I say, even if you know the ending and somebody's told you it before, still watch it, because it's just put together in such a beautiful way. The way it interlaces these flashbacks and flash forwards, and sort of tells these two men's story, is really, really powerful.
Yeah. It sounds like a tough one, but an interesting one for how it sort of like portrays these things as not quite being like two sides of the same coin, but like that there are two different, in any of these situations, there's more than one thing going on at once, and it's about how those two things interact with each other. Yeah,
I mean, it is very much a film about obsession. It's about like how one thing can take over your life, and these both men, it's every waking moment of their day they think about this stuff, and it's sort of like, it's like they can't really go a minute without thinking about this incident and how it's like affecting them both in different ways, and that's quite interesting to see it from both points of view. And it's just like and it's also just like beautifully shot. Like the first like 20 minutes is just also a beautiful film about a couple bickering in the Alps, if you want to see that as well. So it's like a really good film, I think.
Ellie, what have you got for us to follow on from that? You did take the easy setup of the film about the kidnapper and his obsession with kidnapping people.
Well, pretty similar film. So, first thing about me, I love a film that was persecuted for being right. I love a film that kickstarts a genre and also provides an example of that genre so good nobody can top it. and I like a film by Michael Powell. So I watched Peeping Tom, which was the 1960s slasher, which was so controversial on release that it ruined Powell's career. It came out 2 months before Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in the US, and there's a pretty significant overlap between like what they are covering, but almost immediately like it was reappraised as a masterpiece in like the 70s and is now considered amazing, one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films. It follows Mark, who works 2 gigs as one is a focus puller for a film team that does like advertisements, and another is a photographer of like pinup girls, like in a really seedy sort of joint above a newsagent's. He lives in his late abusive father's big house where he rents out the other rooms to tenants without telling them that he's their landlord. He just keeps to himself. He's very shy. But he's also a compulsive serial killer, who records his brutal murders with like an old film camera and replays them in his dark room / lair. So like it was, immediately like considered, even though there's less blood in this than there is in Hitchcock's Psycho, but it was even the mere suggestion of this kind of violence that was considered obscene at the time. But that's not to say that it's squeaky clean. I think that if you were to watch it now, you would probably realize that like, it's very unempathetic to the victims of this murderer, right? Like the women who he kills. Once they are killed, they have big presences, but once they are killed, they are out of the plot, they're irrelevant, and we kind of move past them. And in a weird way, it's kind of messed up that like, the film is so empathetic to him. And I think that's what's really radical about this film, is that like it's actually seeking to pathologize this behavior, which to many people at the time would have been considered like unbelievable, unimaginable. So, just the idea that he's not unequivocally evil, but that there are reasons to how he does what he does. Like I said, he sort of had this like childhood abuse. His father filmed him. His scientific father filmed him at all times. And he says in his words, like, I was never allowed a moment's privacy. So the idea in 1960 that like withholding any amount of privacy from a child their entire lives is a form of child abuse is kind of a radical idea. And Mark, unlike Norman Bates, he wants a cure. He doesn't want to do this. It's a compulsion, and he actually fears for the people in his life because he is a danger to them. And like, to that end, I think that it is a slasher that is has really interesting ideas about like obsession and violence. But I think that even more insulting to the British institution at the time is also what makes this film like truly genius, which is its assertion that like everyone is a voyeur, right? Like it's, there's this posh businessman in an early scene who like sort of walks into the newsagents and really sort of like covertly tries to buy some like nudie photographs or whatever. And the fact as well that like we keep going back to Mark's job in this advertising company, and like, the strange series of murders happening in the news has been some distress on the model who's supposed to like pick out a trunk or a hat and show what range they have, but they're making her do it. She's getting more and more traumatized, but like they just have to keep satisfying the general public's desire to see advertisements, to consume, to witness. They're kind of doing a terrible thing to this model at the center of it all. So like Mark is only able, even in his sort of ordinary, sort of non-violent persona, is still feeding into the fact that everybody in Britain, everybody in the world is a peeper. Everyone wants to look at something. Everybody wants to see. And even the sort of like rather like sweet friendship that he makes with the woman who lives below him, who's like a young 21-year-old woman who wants to write a children's book about a camera and all the sort of magical things that it takes pictures of. Like she's just sort of his friend out of curiosity rather than anything. Like she's so interested in him, and she just finds his like dark room so wondrous. And it's only, I mean, slight spoilers for a film that's 60 years old. She only discovers his dark secret because she sort of has a nosy through his films when he's not there. Like she's a peeper as well. Like I think that they're saying something very interesting about already at that point in history when there was far less like actual sort of sensationalized violence in the real life media. They are saying something about violent individuals and how they are ultimately products of the society that they live in, and they are permitted, they are licensed in a way by the unchecked flaws in the people around them. So yeah, like I think that like people thought that the film was sort of exonerating this maniac simply because like the film Powell was capable of sort of showing a society in which that kind of person could have been created. And it just goes to show, like, I don't know, the sort of, ire that it stirred up was so short-lived. I think, like I said, it was like the 70s that it started to get reappraised. And even in his lifetime, though it had such a detriment to his filmmaking career, like he got to learn that like people love this film. And Martin Scorsese says that this and 8.5 are like the 2 films you need to watch. So like on top of all that, it's also just like a great thriller.
Well, I think it's like filmmakers love it because it's also it's about the obsession of filmmaking. This is like somebody who's taken filmmaking to the nth degree, and like I think the opening shot is actually. Am I right? The opening shot is the murder. You see I thought it's probably the first time it's ever happened, but you see a murder through the point of view of the camera, and it's only later you understand how he's doing his murders. It's very Freudian. He's putting like this kind of long spear or like a. It's like almost like a bayonet, or something.
A bayonet on the end of his
but so very Freudian, obviously. But like, the first scene I remember is like shocking because like, you see, you're literally in the position of him, and like from then that sets up this idea of empathy. You are this character, and then you follow his point of view kind of completely.
Yeah. So I've got one that we can round off with that follows a lot of these same kind of things. American Psycho. So American Psycho, the Mary Harron, is it? Harmon?
Mary Harron, I think.
I think we'll say Mary Harron. I'm sure it's Mary Harron. I'm going to keep saying Mary Harron while someone types in American Psycho director into Google. And just 2 seconds on this, and we will have...
Yeah, so Mary Harron.
Mary Harron.
Fine director of lots of Madonna's videos, actually. That's how she just got started.
Excellent. And director of this film, which is an adaptation, obviously, of the Bret Easton Ellis Patrick Bateman. The thing about Patrick Bateman is he wants to be the very best, like no one ever was. He wants to. The thing that he is initially obsessed with, as you meet him, is the pursuit of being the best business boy he can be, and it's about dressing right, eating right, wearing the right eye mask before you go to bed, having the right business cards. And I think one of the things about American Psycho on a rewatch that's so interesting is how clear it is a satire of that obsession with wealth and status, and how you could be so obsessed with that, with things like having the right shade of white on your business card or getting into the right restaurant, that it would completely mask horrible tendencies that aren't even that far beneath the surface. People just wouldn't notice, because if everyone is in this horrible rat race of trying to be the best stockbroker or mergers and acquisitions person they can be, you could, as happens repeatedly in the film, Patrick Bateman, who's played by Christian Bale in a really actually quite incredible, like able to switch gears really, really seamlessly and terrifyingly. Patrick Bateman will just straight up say to people, "I've killed a bunch of folk," and people aren't listening, because his drive to commit these kind of horrible murders and to drag various different people down with him, it's like he's got multiple different things that he is obsessed by and possessed by and kind of driven to do. But if it's not one of the things that everybody else is obsessed with, then it's like they literally can't hear him. And I think that's it's really interesting to think about that as like, if you're in that kind of, in a very kind of like hyper-capitalist, hyper-consumerist society, then people will be obsessed with you wearing the right shirt or having the right shoes or like going to the right bars. That if you exhibit all the signs of being a grade A 3-star nutcase, they'll just ignore it because it's not relevant to what they're currently trying to do. That's like one of the things that I took from American Psycho. But the two of you have seen American Psycho, right? What do you reckon?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's also probably a metaphor for capitalism and how, like, it does make you sort of inherently evil. If you constantly just think of money, you have to like think of like essentially people who make a lot of money essentially have to have little empathy for all the people who don't have money. It's like essentially that. So it's like it's the ultimate kind of like expression of that. If you have no empathy, this is that incarnate.
Are there not like studies that corroborate this, that like to act in with those very sort of hierarchical sectors, like you only advance by being incredibly ruthless and having like a psychological profile akin to being a psychopath? Yeah. And I think that's sort of something that it's trying to get at, is that like, I don't know, that especially as you're right, it's like it's to do with the materialism of it all, that kind of obfuscates what are some severe deficiencies in like empathy and just like basic decency, because if the stuff's shiny enough, that's all people care about.
Well, the whole thing, like he does he not stuff all his bodies in some sort of flat, and then it turns out it's sold and all the bodies are gone. So clearly somebody thought, well, I could turn this into a crime scene, or I could dispose of all the bodies and make a profit. And somebody else's, that's not even him, that's the realtor has decided that. And that's just like, yeah, that's the sick society we live in, that people would do that, would rather just like ignore crimes as long as money's getting made.
Yeah. And I think that one of the other things that's really interesting from like an obsession standpoint is his like Wikipedia level descriptions of classic albums, because that hits down that thing as well, that like it's about the performance of a lot of things that people get like obsessed by or become kind of like essentially become like kind of experts and then go too far. It's this thing of wanting to perform knowing about something and wanting to perform being the best at something. And that, I think, is what American Psycho really gets right, is this idea of like the performance of being obsessed by money and what that means and how that can be used to like mask things that are not necessarily part of that on the surface but are very closely connected to it. Because if he just had the right suit, that wouldn't be good enough. He has to show everybody that he has the right suit. The scene that, as we were talking about on the tram down, with the classic business card scene, it's like, it's not just about being happy in yourself that you have this thing. It's about proving to everyone around this table that you're better at doing this than they are. And that, I think, is one of the most like horrifying parts of American Psycho when you really think about it, because you see films about serial killers and about, you know, people who do really horrific things. And you can kind of console yourself in a weird way that those kind of horrific crimes are actually comparatively rare. They don't happen very often. And one of the reasons that they get in the news when they do happen is because of how rare and how kind of like abject and completely out of the normal that they are. But everybody knows somebody who is obsessed with, especially in this society we live in, everyone knows somebody who is too obsessed with their image, too obsessed with material things, will take any opportunity to like have a like to point out that their like jumper is better than your jumper. And that is the thing that actually you can, because that's real, you know, people who are like that. And I'm not saying that American Psycho makes you think that they're all murderers. I'm just saying American Psycho makes you think that they're all bad. And if all these people are bad, where does that leave me? As one of the few good guys with a shit business card. Disgraceful. I think that might be as good a place as any to end for this week.
Yeah, almost an hour on the dot.
Yeah, we did it. We didn't need Anahit after all. No, we do, actually, and we'll be very glad when she's back in 2 weeks' time. Back from Venice, whereas we're going out into Leith after this. So thank you, Jamie.
Cheers, Pierre.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Pierre.
You can follow us on Letterboxd. If you want to email us, CineSkinny@theskinny.co.uk. Like I say, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Back here at ground floor, the EHFM spot on Junction Street. Come and check it out. The coffee's very nice. Although I have only had a coffee and haven't had lunch, so I am quite hungry. Probably why I ran out of steam a little bit towards the end of that American Psycho bit. But, you know, it's all fine. Anyway, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Ellie has just pointed out that I have once again forgotten to do the Letterboxd scores. So we have a Letterboxd. It's at the CineSkinny. And as you can tell, we're all totally up to date with the Letterboxd and always aware of its workings and how and where we are with the reviews. So we'll do Starve Acre first. Jamie Dunn, hit me. What do you reckon?
It's a tough one. Probably,
should I come back to you?
Probably, I'm going to say a 2. I feel like it's a beautifully made film, and to give it like a 1 would be a shame to all the kind of great craftspeople who have made it look so great. But yeah, it's a 2.
Ellie?
For me, it's a 2.5. That's fair.
The extra half of the rabbit. Or the
extra yeah. The rabbit is carrying that half star.
Ellie has a rule. If you put a puppet in the film, that's half a star out the gate. I also think it's a 2. I think it's got some good elements, but it's not good. So there we go. That's a 2. And then the Red Rooms. Red Rooms, Ellie, what do you think? I think we all agreed that this was good, so this will be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they might give it a 4.
Yeah?
4 stars.
Yeah. Jamie?
Yeah, I think I give it a 4.5 because this film, just for its invention, just for doing things that is unusual and sort of going above and beyond what a low budget film on this subject does, it's like, yeah. And for being surprised. It's quite rare. Like I get surprised at a film. Like usually films are what you expect they're going to be. They're marketed to death at you. So it's lovely to see a film where I didn't know much about it, and it felt like seeing it at a festival or something. It was like it was pretty cool. Even watching the trailer, I would defy to watch the trailer and have a clue what it's going to be about, because the trailer's actually just pretty vibey. So yeah.
It is a rare film when you don't know what it's about when you go in. You have very little idea what it's about for long periods of it, and you still think it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, even still,
that's the real twist ending.
Even still, I kind of want to see it again to maybe work out stuff, because like it didn't all. I'm still a bit confused about our motivations. So yeah, it's good.
That's called rewatch value.
Yeah,
I think it's a 4 as well. I think it's really, really good. I think I would say it couldn't be a 5-star film just because I think the fact that she's so inscrutable and hard to read does make it's your mileage might vary in terms of how satisfied you are by the conclusion. But it's a very, very good film that you should go and see this weekend. Right now, I think we finally are done. Thank you, Jamie.
Cheers, Jim.
Thank you, Ellie, for pointing that out.
Thank you.
And yes, thanks to you all for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.